All right. Welcome back to another episode of Saving America's Money. Today we're going to do a little bit of a Sunday conversation. I am currently at the Martin Luther King Reservoir in Oakland, California, where that is located right next to the airport. An airport that was getting ready to name itself the San Francisco Bay Oakland International Airport. And luckily for all of us, that did not happen. So it is still the Oakland International Airport, but they wanted to add the San Francisco Bay. That's a whole another conversation. I have a lot to say about the way Oakland, California has done business. Not the smartest people in the world, that's for sure. But today, I want to kind of talk about what we're going through right now, and you may know it. I certainly know the transition that we're kind of seeing in the monetary system. And last week I posted a video on kind of what happened with silver. Silver has been trending in the price accumulation asset class. That makes sense. I guess what I'm trying to say is that silver has definitely been moving upward. I think some bikers are behind me. And that's a good thing because, it is a suppressed metal. It's been suppressed for a long time, and nice bikes. And it's about time that silver has really shown its real value. And when we look at the real value of particularly metals, that happened because when we got taken off the gold standard, that was back in 1971, where Richard Nixon said that, there were speculators in the gold market. Now, I'm not no deep dive economist, but this was supposed to be a temporary, transition. And again, it was a transition, temporary holding, but it wasn't temporary. It was purposely done. And that allowed the Federal Reserve to print as much money as they could have really see. So if you look at any, print as much money as they needed, excuse me. So if you look at any chart that says, when did really inflation start? Well, inflation really did start when the Federal Reserve was able to really print money, and we got off the gold standard. So that was one transition that we went through. We went from a asset-backed currency to now a currency that has no assets. And at one point, I guess you could say the only asset was backed by it was oil. But that ended several years ago. So the dollar has really had no assets. And when we were on the petrodollar, is what it was called, we were always in war. Yay, war for everybody, right? Because we had to go protect the world, and that is how the U.S. has been able to keep its reserve status over all these years. Well, that is no longer the case, because now you have other countries who are obviously doing business together. You just had China and Russia and the BRICS nations. It hasn't really hit mainstream media yet, but I did see a video, and we know that this is coming, that they decided to launch their own digital asset-backed currency. And that digital asset-backed currency is called the unit. And the unit is a basket of currencies made up of gold, I want to say silver, sure, and I want to say some other basket of currency. So What that is going to do is going to allow the BRICS nations to be able to trade with each other without using the United States Federal Reserve notes. What a beautiful day. Look at this water behind me. This is, again, the Martin Luther King Reservoir near the Oakland International Airport. And on the other side of me, which you can't see, you'll see the Oakland Coliseum that was formerly the home of both the now Las Vegas Raiders and soon to be Las Vegas A's. Last time I did my Sunday conversation, we talked about how the A's had an opportunity to really, supplant themselves in downtown Oakland, which I'll show you in a second here it's in the atmosphere over there. It's in the scenery in front of me, so you guys can't see it. But that would have really set another transition for a city that desperately needs economic benefits. So the A's, the Warriors, and the Raiders have all left the Oakland area, and I'll show you behind me. If you can see, that is formerly the home of all three professional organizations. A's, Raiders, and Warriors played in that area right there. So back to the transition. Now, where are we going? That is the question. Where are we going? So what the rise of metals should tell you is that the US dollar is becoming weaker. And we saw this with Bitcoin, and we're seeing this now with gold and silver and uranium. These metals are now starting to rise. And what happens when you have a weaker dollar? Well, normally what happens is, and I want to make sure I'm correct on this, and if I'm not, please forgive me. But typically when you have a weaker dollar, you have lower interest rates. And we just saw that Jay Powell came out this week and said he's not going to lower interest rates. He had a couple of weird little moments. He also said that the Federal Reserve is not in charge of the US dollar. And that the Treasury is. So it seems like to me that there has been a transition of power from the Federal Reserve to the Treasury. And that, Treasury Secretary Scott Bassett is the one maybe really pulling the strings. I'd be interested to see this coming week or month or so. I think they named that Kevin Walsh is going to be the new Federal Reserve governor. And that is a Trump appointee, so we'll see how that goes. And I'm very interested to see when that happens, if he gets selected and takes the position, what happens to our interest rates? Now, speculating here, I'm going to think that Trump wants these interest rates as low as possible. What will that do? And we're going to get back to the transition of where we're going. But what will that do? If we get low interest rates, it should spur a lot of lending and economic activity, right? We should see the real estate market really boom because people are going to want to buy homes. You should see a lot of projects and businesses get started, because now that money is cheaper, they can afford to go out and borrow more. So lower interest rates does indeed spur the economic activity. But if the dollar is weaker, you're probably asking yourself, well, how does that work? And I guess the answer that I can give you is that we have to go back to an asset-backed currency. I think it wasn't a mistake. They purposely did it. But I think in the long term, what it really did for our country is separated the two classes. Really, it was like, the poor and the middle class. And now that has kind of become like one class. And only in my opinion, I could be wrong. When, people are living paycheck to paycheck, and a weaker dollar means that you have to spend more dollars to buy assets. And so that is what has happened over time. That is why real estate has inflated. That is why the stock market has inflated. That is why most anything that costs money, groceries, gas, everything, gets more expensive the more they print money. And when did they print the most money? They printed the most money around the pandemic and shortly after that. When Biden was in office, actually, I want to say they printed $5 trillion, right? And the solution typically is, well, if we need more stimulus or quantitative easing, as they used to call it, then we should just print more money. And that fixes everything. Well, it really doesn't. It adds to our national debt, which is currently at approaching $39 trillion. And it also makes it harder for the average person to, become an owner of assets to build their wealth. So I almost wonder what would have happened if, if Trump didn't get into office, and then where will we be? Because we were spiraling. And I tell people this, you don't need to look further than where you're at. Like, if you live in a place like I live, which happens to be one of the most beautiful cities in terms of climate and actual direct access to a major metropolitan area, Oakland, California really should be an economic superpower. But this is a city that is a prime example of wrong leadership operating for years, and allows a city to crumble. I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen Oakland fall so fast. And yes, it will rebound, but it will only rebound is when the right leadership is in place, and they put safety above all at the forefront of their mission. So why do I use that as a case to this transition? So the transition that we're going through, should it scare you? Should you be scared? I don't think so. I don't think, and I mean, there's a lot of doom and gloom out there these days, and people saying, oh, the dollar is going to collapse, and, we're going to be, eating, food off the streets. I don't think it's going to get that bad. I do think you're starting to see bank collapses, or banks collapsing, or maybe merging into other banks. There could be bank runs because people are going to want their money. But this is all in preparation of the new monetary system that is being built. And some people call it, the parallel economy. Whereas on one side, you have the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve note that has been printed into oblivion. And on the other side, you have the stable coin. So just so you know, the Clarity Act is being signed into law, hopefully in a couple of days if it wasn't already signed. And what is that? The Clarity Act, you can look this up, is where we are going to allow tokenization of our monetary system, meaning that we will be now using stable coins as a form of monetary currency. And which means that, the actual Federal Reserve note should cease to exist, which is weird because most people only know the dollar for what it is. But if we go back to a stablecoin backed asset, and the way I understand it to be, is that stable coins will be used to also pay off our debt because they will be backed by the national debt of the United States of America. See, we can't just say, oh, we're not going to pay it. We have to pay the debt off. And because no one is buying our treasuries, that's the one way we try to pay our debt off. What they're going to do, and it sounds kind of weird, right? But what they're going to do is they're going to attach the debt to the stable coins. And then every time we spend $1 or we use a stable coin, a portion of the debt is paid off. So the Clarity Act will allow for stable coins to be used as essentially currency. And then it will also allow for a blockchain system to be put in place where, sounds scary, but all of our transactions will be monitored. And to a certain degree, there already are. So, don't get too paranoid just yet. But for some of us, this is a great opportunity because this is going to be another wealth transfer. And if you invested in some of the blockchains that will be participating in the new monetary system, well, then you've positioned yourself very, very well in a great place. So we're going through this transition, and in order to do that, I think what has to happen is the Federal Reserve note really has to collapse. I probably should have led off with that statement. But why do I say that? Because for one system to exist, the other system has to essentially go down. And what will that affect? Well, I've always said that 2008 was kind of a precursor to the banking system, right? Over leveraged, greedy Wall Street guys who never thought that the mortgage the mortgage sector would tank or collapse. Well, the same thing could be said of the dollar, right? That the dollar is so strong, it would essentially be hard to collapse it. But I think anytime that you print money and there's no way to really pay off that debt, well, at some point, you're just running a deficit. And just like Oakland, California, or California, you can't operate for much longer on a deficit. And I don't think the United States of America can operate on a deficit. So that is why I believe the dollar will collapse, the Federal Reserve note will collapse, and at some point we will make a transition to a new monetary system. When and where that happens, I do not know. But I've been following this stuff close enough that I think we're seeing the writings on the wall, right? So, what will our system look like in the future? Well, it might look like a treasury dollar, right? Backed by some type of asset that just can't be printed in oblivion. Because when you have an asset like gold continue to rise, that means that the dollars that you have, or your dollar, if it's backed by gold, that means that you don't need as many dollars to buy things. So, which means that our everyday goods and services should ultimately come down in price. Now, that may be wishful thinking, and in a perfect world, I hope that is what happens. But if not, at least we are somewhere in the ballpark. Just like the A's used to play in this ballpark at Oakland Coliseum, which I have to say I'm going to miss watching baseball games there. It wasn't the prettiest stadium in the world by no means, but I will tell you one thing. I'm going to stand behind it. Before Mountain Davis was built, hopefully you can see it, those hills in the backdrop of the Oakland Coliseum were a picturesque, like just the perfect scenery for a baseball game. Like you're watching the baseball game, and then you're looking at these beautiful hills in the background until the Raiders decide to come back and say, hey, we want to build 20,000 more seats to fill a stadium. Well, the Raiders left, and we're still paying for that 20,000 seat we call Mount Davis, that after a while the Raiders weren't even sitting up there. So go figure. And now they're just gone. So that is the rant for today. I hope you enjoyed Saving America's Money Sunday conversation. I'll be back next Sunday to kind of wrap up another week full of what it is to be a very busy week in the news cycle. Sometimes I'm almost feel like I can't keep up, but I'm going to stick to my agenda. I put out 2 videos during the week and then 1 on the weekend. And then one day, maybe I can do this every single day. But until then, stay strong, stay safe, and continue to save America's money. Peace.